guest, Mr. Brooklyn Liu. So I was able to meet Brooklyn. He was one of my dissenting commenters in my Matt Dillahunty response video or debate reaction video. So I'm always happy to bring on guests from all different walks of life, all different beliefs, so we can have the most important types of discussions, I think. So with that being said, welcome to the channel, Lou. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
Yeah.
I'm 62 years old. I'm a former evangelical Christian. About 12 years ago or so, I changed my mind. So I went in a different direction. I'm now an atheist. I have a small channel I started recently, Brooklyn Liu the Skeptic, and I do atheist type content.
Okay. Awesome. Now I have to ask, are you from Brooklyn?
Originally, yeah.
Okay.
But not now. I live in Florida.
Oh, too cold up there, huh?
Yeah.
Fair enough. Half of my dad's side of the family, they're from Highland Falls. So we would visit. I don't know if it's like right next to West Point in New York. So it's not too far from the city, maybe like 45 minutes or so. But yeah, that's that's awesome. Okay. So as far as being an evangelical, I guess, tell me about what was the turning point? Like what happened to move you into atheism or at least skepticism?
Yeah. Well, I was born again about 28 years old or so.
Okay.
I was Catholic before that, by birth, so to say.
From New York.
But
Yeah.
when I got older, I was born again. I was a Christian until about 12 years ago or so. And it was about a 3-year pursuit of truth. I mean, that's always been my goal. It is to pursue what is true. And I spent about 3 years studying different things other than the Christian worldview and the Christian Bible interpretations. And kind of my faith started falling one pillar at a time. So after about 3 years, I looked at myself and realized I wasn't believing anymore. So that's pretty much, what happened.
Okay. So would you say like when you started to take it more seriously, whether this was true or not, that's when the skepticism started to arise? Or had you always had you given it the same amount of thought beforehand in your faith as opposed to when your deconstruction started?
Yeah, I mean, I was a pretty serious Christian. Many, many years I was a Christian, but like anyone, I guess my walk was not always the same. There were years I was really on fire for God, and years maybe I wasn't so on fire for God. But overall, I took it very serious. I was into apologetics, Bible study.
Okay.
I studied apologetics and tried to defend my faith. I guess
Okay.
like you're doing, I guess. And I used to read stuff like Josh McDowell, Norman Geisler.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I read so many apologetic books back in the day, and I just didn't feel these arguments held ground after I started studying other information, And it like I said, it wasn't an overnight thing. It was probably about a 3-year study. Evolution was big for me in the beginning.
Okay.
Because I used to believe in a very literal interpretation of scripture.
Okay.
So, like, I didn't believe Genesis anymore in a literal way. That was one of the first things. And then little by little, I studied my way out. And that's my honest story.
Gotcha. So did you ever hear any pushback from like theistic evolutionists or an old earth creationist, somebody who didn't take Genesis in the literal sense, in the young earth sense?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard different apologetics, of course, but that didn't make me not a Christian because I went the other way. I said, all right, well, maybe I can't take Genesis literally, right? But that doesn't mean I'm not going to be a believer.
Okay.
But it was, gradual. I
Okay.
mean, when I was a Christian, we used to call that a slow slide out of the
Backslide.
faith, But it was slow. It was methodical, and I remember the day I realized I didn't believe anymore, and it was for a moment scary because it was what I, built my life upon and my identity and everything else. So it was a frightening moment, but I'm a pretty brave guy, and that went away, and that was it. So since then, I'm a different person in terms of what I believe, and nothing bad has happened to me. In fact, my life has gotten better, but that doesn't matter. I mean, I'm just saying my life has gotten better myself.
Okay. So I guess what was the first argument, or what was like the most compelling argument that you heard against Christianity?
Well, the first was because I was a biblical literalist type, was evolution. I
Okay.
studied evolution for quite a long time, realized that it is true. The evidence became overwhelming to me. After that, I got into the canon, um, how the Bible was put together. Um, what are some of the other things? I mean, literally almost everything, the Trinity, the big foundations, the pillars that I held on to for so many years. I just started seeing them differently. Like I no longer think the Trinity makes sense. When I was a Christian, I actually did think it makes sense, right? But I don't anymore because I just changed. I mean, it's a funny thing when you're a Christian, and I don't know how to fully put it to a Christian, because when I tell someone that I'm an atheist and I used to be a Christian, they'll say, "Oh no, you never were a Christian, right?" And and I
Depends
don't
on their
get that
view of
because
salvation.
I mean
Some
I
people think you can't
dedicated my
lose your
entire life
salvation.
to Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean,
There
literally.
there yeah. There's a
So,
view of, so there's, I'm sure you're aware, the debate that's ongoing, been ongoing for a while. Can you lose your salvation?
right.
And I don't really have a hard position in that. I think that there's convincing evidence both ways, so I wouldn't make a solid stance for either or. Just kind of sit in the
Mhm.
middle. Um, and like ultimately, it doesn't matter. you want like
Mm.
you want to build the kingdom, and no matter what, no matter which side is true, it's best to try to keep people strong in their faith either way. So, but no, I think when I hear Christians say that, I don't think that's a wise method to try to bring people back to Christ. I think
I
it's
mean,
kind of
it
insulting.
does it's insulting, but I still don't understand what they're getting at, because I feel like they're trying to get in my mind, and they could understand all the years that I dedicated to Jesus and just throw it aside and say, "Oh no, he never really believed these things." I fully believed it. I mean, I
Right.
when I became a Christian, I laid down my life and followed Christ. Right? And
Yeah.
this was not a little thing in my life. This was life changing at the time. I mean, I literally walked away from a business to serve Jesus Christ. Right? And I went through lots of ups and downs serving Jesus Christ. So I raised children serving Jesus Christ. So it wasn't like a joke to me or anything. It was very serious. And I just feel like when a Christian says that, I understand it's what they believe, but it doesn't make me want to believe, because to me it seems like a silly thing to know what someone else went through.
Yeah. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know why my camera just
Yeah, I see you like
bugged out.
still.
Um, every once in a while that happens. So let's just, there we go. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. So yeah, that's again, that's a tactic I've seen Christians use, because ultimately, if you can't lose salvation, right? If that's not possible, once saved, always saved is the term, then they would be correct. But there's no way to know that for sure. And I've seen lots of examples, like you've described about yourself, of people who were on fire for a long time and then they left because of various different reasons. Now, for you, your story kind of reminds me of Rhett. Are you familiar with Rhett and Link?
I saw one video of Rhett. I'm
Okay.
really not like a fan or really know much about them, but I saw one video of him speaking to Alex O'Connor
Alex O'Connor.
about
Yeah, you
leaving.
saw the recent one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only thing I know of him.
Okay. Yeah, that's it reminds me of that. So it seems like a lot of your pillars of understanding, like for example, he says that evolution was a big problem for him
Yeah, that
because
was for me.
the church was very dogmatic about that. And so when he was convinced that Darwinian evolution was true, and these people he relied on for truth, his church authority, he couldn't trust them anymore.
Hmm.
And so then he's like, well, if I can't trust them about this, what can I trust them about? And then it just continued to trail on.
Yeah.
And so it seems like, does that seem reminiscent of you to a certain extent?
Yeah, and one aspect I think was I was going through a personal transformation in other ways as well. All right, so I think that played a role with my marriage
Okay.
was changing. I'm no longer married to the fundamentalist Christian I used to be married to. Right? And
Okay.
she's a great woman. I have I mean, nothing bad to say, but I was having issues in the marriage as well. And I think that made me really start looking at myself. I mean, so to me, it was coming out of Christianity. I won't say religion, but just Christianity was kind of life transforming, right? Because I had lived my life in a belief system for so many years. It was
Yeah.
a long time, and coming out of that, I felt it was me being true to myself. So that's how I personally would describe it. I became very real with myself and what I actually did believe. I started looking at everything, not just religion, not just Christianity, but everything. You know.
Okay. Gotcha. So I guess this is one, thought, for lack of a better term, that I would uh, throw to you. I think that the very like reminiscent idea that I mentioned about the authorities being seen as not reliant, like I can't rely on this church authority anymore.
Hmm.
I think that this is actually what we should expect if Christianity is true. I think we should expect that men will be wrong. Man will be fallen, and the only saving grace we really have is God, is
Hmm.
Christ. Like I recently, one of my favorite scholars, his name is Michael Brown. Have you ever heard of him?
Yeah, Mr. Michael, Mr.
Yeah.
Michael Brown being put back in ministry after being found to have done some naughty things. Yes.
Right, right. And so when this news came out, I think the news initially came out maybe a year or two ago now. Maybe it's a year ago. Yeah, I was pretty upset. This is a guy I've looked at a lot of his arguments, especially for like messianic prophecies, things like that. He speaks Hebrew fluently. He reads the Old Testament in a Hebrew text. Like the guy he knows, he probably will forget more than I'll ever know. He's a brilliant scholar, but he, like every other man, is flawed, and he did something bad, very bad. And I just remember feeling disappointed, but then thinking, you cannot put your trust in man, because this can and likely will happen. And it was just kind of a reality check for me. So I if there's any thought that might be somewhat profound to you from today's discussion. I hope that's at least slightly one of them.
The only thing I would ask you is who are you supposed to trust? I determined at a certain point in my life to trust my own thoughts. I wasn't giving my thoughts over to any men. I decided
Right.
to do what I thought was correct. And
Right.
the whole authoritarian thing left. I don't serve any man whatsoever.
Well, you should know your own thoughts, right? You can trust that your thoughts are true because from a philosophical standpoint, to a certain point, you kind of have to. Otherwise, if you can't trust your own thoughts, then you can't reason. But you can lean on as it says in Proverbs, lean not on your own understanding, but also of God. So there's, for example, what really got me super strengthened in my faith was studying philosophy. And I know you had mentioned we shouldn't have to look into philosophical arguments to see God's existence, but this is something like the ultimate answers to life, right? If we examine, because you say that you're a naturalist, right? You're a naturalist atheist. Like you don't
Let
think there's
me
any supernatural?
let me be clear
Yeah.
because I don't mind philosophy. Okay. So it's not like I have this big negative thing, philosophy is a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think
Okay.
philosophy is a good thing because it makes you think. And that alone is a positive to me. So that I want to make clear. But I don't think philosophy ultimately proves things. You see, I
Hmm.
think to prove things, you need more than philosophy, and that's kind of where I'm at with that. Now, I know that what I watched with you talking to Matt, that was philosophical, right? And that's
Mhm.
okay, all right. But even with the philosophy, if one is able to persuade someone that, well, I have a better way of looking at this than you do, does that really prove that a God exists? I don't get it. Like, I don't think it does.
Gotcha. So let's run through that because that seemed to be a critique that you had.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
all right. So with the Bayesian argument that I was trying to present that Matt would never let me present, honestly, I think he did that on purpose because I've seen him debate somebody I know named Than Christopoulos. He now works for Inspiring Philosophy, where he did a Bayesian argument on the resurrection. And Bayesian probability is not the same as frequentism. A lot of people confuse that. And so with Bayes, what you're going to do is you're going to take two hypotheses or two theories, and you're going to see how you can increase, if you can increase the prior probability of that hypothesis. So basically, we're measuring conditional hypotheses. So if we are to weigh out, let's say I'm an agnostic, and I'm looking at naturalism and theism, just for this exercise here. And so I'm going to see what can I do to raise the probability if I'm looking at them both the same 50-50. I'm an agnostic here from a neutral position. I can't think of a way to raise the probability of naturalism for something like the cause of the universe. Because under naturalism, you have to appeal to either a brute fact, right? Which means that there is no explanation, there just is a cause, or there's going to be an infinite series of causes. So if that's the case, you either have no explanation or you have an infinite amount of explanations. Whereas under theism, we can explain why God would want to create or cause a universe. For example, creating people, creating beings that are capable of doing good. If God exists and God is good, he would want to create more good. And so that's an explanation. We can raise the prior probability of theism. And we're going to so if we raise the probability or attempt to with naturalism under like a multiple universe type scenario, an infinite universe is creating universes like Roger Penrose is kind of thrown out there and other physicists, probably not so much today, but in the last 20 years. That's going to an infinite amount of explanations as opposed to one. So the one is simpler. So to me, from an explanatory value perspective, that's going to rank higher. So it's going to raise the probability higher. So I don't think it's possible to prove with certainty that God exists. I don't think that's possible. We're human beings. We shouldn't expect to be able to do that. So the best we can do is show what's more probable. Some people argue, well, what's more intuitive, but intuitions aren't always correct. So that's why probability is a reliable form of data that we can use. I mean, this is what science uses, what all sorts of things use. So that's why that was one reason what I was trying to present to Matt, which he didn't let me, but that's one, I think, good reason to believe, at least in theism, that God exists. So what are your thoughts with that?
I mean, I think you're free to believe that and you're free to think that makes sense. For me personally, it doesn't make sense, right? But I mean, this is what philosophy is. There's, as you probably know, philosophers debate with each other, right? Someone has one view, another one has a different view. And
Right.
Ultimately, I'm not bound personally to a philosophy. And I literally live my life just by my own mind, what I think. And the whole thing with philosophy, like, I don't understand. So I'll just ask you a question. Like,
Mhm.
how do you know you're married with children, right?
Right.
So how do you know your wife and children exist? Do you go to philosophical arguments? No, you just
No.
I mean, I just
Right.
know that the people in my life exist. All right.
Right.
And I don't need to appeal to intellectual argument. And to me, it's weak when you have to appeal to these philosophies to talk about just the literal existence of something. It's like it should be totally obvious to me that God is real. I
But
mean, I
that's the
shouldn't have
thing,
to
right?
think about what Bayes thought about.
Yes,
And
but Bayes is just an example of probability in this because we don't have a multiple amount of universes we can compare. We only have one. So frequentism isn't going to work. So the other method of probability available is Bayes' theorem. Now, the problem is what you're insinuating in the statement you made is that you don't see evidence for I think I do. I think that existence itself is far better explained with God than without God. So I if we're because if you look at everything from an agnostic point of view, right, we're looking at the cause of the universe. If the cause of the universe exists, by definition, it would at least have the capability of being immaterial. If that's the case, we can't see it from like a physical perspective. There's God. There like that. What we can see though is evidence of something that is created or naturalism. Like that's kind of like the dichotomy we're looking at here. And I know like in my discussion with Matt, he had said, "Oh, theism and naturalism, that's not a true dichotomy." Although that's the case, the true dichotomy is either God or some form of gods exist or not. So
I would go along with that. I mean, as far as naturalism, personally, I would say I'm a naturalist because I don't see or understand anything supernatural. All right. So I would say I'm naturalist, but that's subject to change because if
okay.
if someone could demonstrate to me or show me that something supernatural is real, I'm open to it. But after leaving the religion, the Christian, the belief system, um, I no longer see anything supernatural. I haven't seen anything supernatural since I was a Christian. So I don't know.
Hmm.
I mean, and when I look back on it, and I'm just being real with you, honest, just
Sure.
trying to express myself. All right. When
Yeah.
I look back on it, it was just my thoughts. I thought a lot about God. I prayed to God. I felt things about God, but I never saw God. I never actually heard God, smelled God. You know, it was to me looking back a mental exercise. But
Okay.
you know,
What
and
is
but
what is
naturalism would be like locking. I would guess that's just saying no, nothing. There's no room at all ever for the idea of anything supernatural. And I would say I'm there, except I'm open to hearing about things supernatural. You
okay?
know,
So if that's the case, then if Do you like have a contention with the Bayesian argument that I laid out? Like, do you think it's wrong?
I don't think any of these arguments are wrong. Okay, let me explain that.
Okay.
These are philosophical arguments.
Hmm.
I don't think they're right or wrong. Okay, it's just a methodology of how someone might approach a subject. All right, I don't think they're absolutes. All right, like
You mean like there's no absolute truth?
hmm, let me ponder that a second.
Well,
I
because
think I think we could say there's workable absolute truths. I don't. I would fall
what does
short
that
of
mean?
saying with the word absolute scares me a little bit, maybe. I mean, because I
How
don't
about
know.
objective?
You know.
Like, do you think that there are objective truths that are mind independent?
Yes, and I
Okay.
think that those things have to be proven and have to be demonstrated, demonstrable. They have to be observable. They're not just ideas, right? So I do think some things, for the sake of living our lives, we can count on, and say yes, that's objectively true, like mathematics or gravity or those types of things. Philosophy, I don't put in that category, so that's kind of it.
What about logic?
I think that logic is a methodology that we use to describe things that are real. And I think logic is great. I have no
Okay.
problem with it, but logic is only as good as the premises we assign to these syllogisms, right?
Because
Like
yeah,
if I come up with a syllogism and, well, this is logical, and I say, well, if this is true, then this is true, then that is true. That sort of line of reasoning. And
hmm,
it's only true if all of those, the premises are true.
right.
They're not true just because I say they're true.
That's correct. So we could use something like logic as a measurement to determine whether something is true. Like, for example, we could tell that contradictions are false because of the law of non contradiction,
Yeah,
right?
I'm with that.
Okay. So logic is a branch of philosophy.
Yes.
So I wouldn't like, we can certainly get to truth with philosophy. Now, you can also get to areas. So, one of the reasons I like philosophy is because it goes beyond most other studies. Like philosophy, you can talk about so much more and learn a lot more and go farther in discussion with philosophy than you could with science, for example, because
Hmm.
science is limited to the material.
Hmm.
Whereas with philosophy, you can not only explore, because science used to be called natural philosophy.
Hmm.
And so you could study natural philosophy about matter, right? And then you can study philosophy of religion, philosophy of mind,
Hmm.
um, it, the discussion between free will and determinism. These are things that are I really like to get into, and we can determine truths about reality. So, what I was asking you about with objective truths, if there is objective truth, right, that means there's mind independent truths, and we can discover these truths, and then we can also be right or wrong about them. And so that means propositions as well can be right or wrong. So that's why I ask with the argument that I gave you, it's a set of propositions that are going to be laid out in the form of premises to a conclusion. Do you agree? It sounds like you think you just don't really have like a position on the argument. You just think it's not convincing. Is that right? Or
I You're talking, one of the things you said, and maybe I and understand I'm not the fastest tool in the shed, right? But it
neither am
seemed
I.
like you didn't lay it out in the form of, you talked about probability, right? I
Right.
mean, I got that part of it, but you
Okay.
didn't explain or show how it is more probable that your God exists, rather than no God. I didn't get that out of what you said. You said
So
probability can be used, and
right,
I'm going there. Yeah, probability can be used, all right? But probability, I mean, I think you would recognize probability isn't perfect either. I mean, there improbable things do happen, all right? But yeah,
that's true.
I'm with probability. I look at my belief in God as on a probability spectrum. So
Right.
I accept if something is very probable, I'm likely to believe it. so
Okay.
so yeah, I'm not against that, but I don't see that you laid that out like in terms of why do you feel this is like so probable that a God exists.
So that was because if you compare, like I did initially, I compared the two hypotheses between naturalism or theism, or you could just do atheism and theism. And I don't have a way to raise the prior of naturalism or atheism, whereas I do have a way to raise the prior of theism. So, like, for example, providing the best explanation for the cause of the universe, I can increase the probability by providing explanatory power under the hypothesis of theism, right? That was the whole God is good. He'd want to create beings that are capable of good. People are, this universe permits people to exist. Whereas under naturalism or atheism, the best you can really appeal to is a brute fact, some form of necessary existence, or you're going to appeal to um, a multiverse of some sort or an infinite amount of universes.
Well, there's a lot of things that I admit. There's your kid, very nice.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's a lot of things that I simply do not know, and I'm not afraid to say that. Okay, it's like when you talk about like a cause,
Hmm.
right? I don't know what you mean by a cause. Like is saying a God is a cause. Is that like the major point you're making?
No, no,
That
no.
there's a God who is a cause?
God
'Cause
would be
I don't really relate
responsible.
to that too
Well,
much.
think of this, right? If the universe began to exist, then there has to
Right.
be a cause, right? There's a change from non existence to existence. There has to be something there. Like, do you accept the principle of causality to be true, cause and effect? Do you think that there are effects that are causeless that happen?
Effects that are causeless. Um, I have to say, honestly, I don't know. I don't know if there are things that are causeless. I mean,
Okay.
I've heard speculation on things, but I've not studied enough or in depth enough to even know. Like I've heard virtual particles, and please, I don't want to get into
Right.
virtual particles. I've
Well,
just
even those,
heard
right,
that
right.
these things can be not caused. All right. Do I even know that? No, I don't know. I have no idea. All right. The thing with the cause, when you say the universe, right?
Right.
So we'll take the universe and say, all right, there is a universe. You and I
Hmm.
agree. I think
Yeah.
there is a universe. You think there is a universe,
Hmm.
right? So there's no disagreement there. Okay.
Right.
But when you talk about a beginning of the universe, that
Right.
I don't know. All right. I don't
Sure.
know how the universe came into existence. You might know, but I don't think anybody truly knows that because it's something that is still being studied.
So when
Right?
you say no, are you meaning certainty?
No, very high. I'm not going to go certainty. Very high probability because the consensus on the universe now in academia is that the universe did not have a beginning. Now, in the
Mm,
70s, or the 60s and 70s, they had a different view. All right.
right.
But that has changed. All right.
Right.
The scholarly consensus today is that the universe didn't have a beginning. It's that it always existed. And they would say
Hmm.
things like the law of conservation of mass, that type of thing,
Right.
that
Matter
that
can't be created or
it can't
destroyed.
be created
Right.
or destroyed in a
Right.
closed system. and they'd say things like energy cannot be created or destroyed in a closed
Right.
system. The universe has what it has. So it didn't come from nothing, okay? But to say we know what happened if there was a Big Bang, and I'm saying if because I don't know that, all right? But
Sure.
if there was, I certainly don't know what was before that. So I don't understand like how this proves anything.
Well, so this is the reason why Sean Carroll, Roger Penrose, even Alan Guth, a lot of these big physicists that are atheists have shied away from a beginning to the universe is because of the theistic implications. Now, and you can hear it when they get questioned. There's a couple of different interviews you can watch, particularly Sean Carroll. In his debate with William Lane Craig, you can tell he realizes, no, I don't think the universe began to exist, because he's an atheist, and that would be, you're going to have problems explaining that. So, but what we can say from physics, right, and what most physicists still agree to some sort of Big Bang theory today, universe 14 billion years old, there was a point to where the universe was or is, and then was not expanding. So something had to start that universe to expand.
Well, I will go there. That I could believe that. All right.
Right.
Now, do I want to make clear? I don't know that. I'm just going by. I'm going by what physicists say.
Right.
Okay, because I literally do not know that to be fact. But I will trust the physicist when they say, or a cosmologist when they say, the universe began about 14 billion years ago from an expansion. All right, I will go there, but
Right. Well,
but
even if it didn't
you're
begin to
going
exist, though.
beyond that, and
What
that's
what
where
I'm
I don't personally go beyond that. I can't
but
even
this
relate to it.
what I'm trying to say here, though, is that either way, even if the universe is eternal or even if it's not, there was a point to where it wasn't expanding and a point to where it was. Something had to cause it to start expanding. Now, you
Okay,
could
and
say that it's
I go there.
self-causing,
I'm with
right?
you.
Okay.
I'm with you on that.
So, and you had mentioned the first law of thermodynamics, and then you also mentioned the law of conservation of mass, which kind of play with each other because matter and energy are correlative, right? Now, the problem is we also have the second law of thermodynamics. And so, the second law, you know what the second law is?
No, I thought the law I was mentioning was a law of physics. I don't know if it was thermodynamics.
That's in physics. Yeah. So the
Okay, the
first law of
second law.
thermodynamics is that energy can't be created or destroyed. And then the law of conservation of mass is the same thing, but with matter,
Okay,
right?
now what? Explain to me the second law and how that applies to what we're talking about.
Right. So the second law is that the universe is always going through entropy. Entropy within the universe is forever increasing in a closed system, right? So that means that the universe is running out of usable energy. It cannot exist infinitely because there is a finite amount of usable energy. Now, we can say that, well, energy will be recycled somehow, but that would be purely an argument from silence because we have no evidence of that. We have ways of us manufacturing energy to recycle it in different ways, but it happening on its own, no, we don't see that happening. That's why there's no such thing as like a perpetual motion machine, or you could just forever have motion without any interference. So that would mean that's going to put a finite time on the universe. So at one point, the universe will cease to at least be expanding. So, like for example, Sean Carroll, he's a very famous cosmologist.
Yeah, I've
He
heard of
came
it.
up, a while ago. He came up with a model called the Carroll-Chen model. And so, what he posited was that we have a universe that's kind of like parallel to us. That is, while we are going in normal entropy state, universe expanding, there's another universe that's going in reverse entropy and not expanding,
Okay.
decreasing, right? To keep us in line. So he's positing a universe we have no evidence of, purely out of theory, nor do we have any reason to believe it would do this outside of extrapolating math, right? So the amount of precision that the universe has to has with things like the cosmological constant, that must be extremely precise for there to be life in the universe, let alone the universe be as is. So we're positing very, very, very extravagant claims, and we say something like God, there's no evidence for, right? Isn't that kind of special pleading?
I think you're reversing it. I don't know. I mean, if I understood, I would tell you. Okay. But I don't get it, because I I would say everything you said, what Carol said, right?
Hmm.
He did not really demonstrate. This is a theoretical thing he's talking about. All right. This is
Right.
not something that I could say, oh, I'm going to plant my flag on that. All right. Because
Well, he did for a while.
he probably has critics in the field.
He does.
Okay. So as someone who's not an expert on it, because I'm
Hmm.
not, all right, I'm supposed to go, oh, well, I'm going to plant my flag with Mr. Carroll.
Well, no.
And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe Mr. Carroll's right. Maybe he's not. All right. So I'm comfortable in that area. Like, I don't stay up at night wondering if Mr. Carroll was right or wrong.
Hmm. Okay.
It just doesn't have meaning to in my life in a practical way. I live my life day to day. I get up. I'm happy to be alive. I live it. And I may be alive tomorrow, may not. And that's how I live, in the moment, in the now. Whether he's right or his critics are right, I simply do not know. And I'm never going to know, because I'm 62 years old, Adam. I'm not
Hmm.
going to study enough to know whether his theory is correct or not. So understand where I'm coming from as just a regular guy. I don't know. I don't know if he's right or wrong. Right.
Right.
Obviously, he makes some sense. I'm not saying he's, way off the, in a crazy world view, but I don't know. I'm
Okay.
sorry, but I'm not going to lie and say I know, because I
Well,
don't.
I'm not expecting you to lie or say if you don't know. The point of me saying that was, it seems it would be special pleading to say that we couldn't posit an explanation of God, which actually is going to have more explanatory power for the entire scope of reality than this parallel universe that's doing this reverse universe thing that's somehow keeping us on track. So the point of me making that was you're as an atheist, you're still going to have to rely on things that you cannot prove. So
Absolutely. I
right.
mean, I recognize that.
Right. So I guess why choose atheism over theism if theism has more explanatory power?
It doesn't explain anything to me. Obviously, you think it explains something to you, but
Hmm.
in my thinking, which is all I have, all right, I have consciousness and I have a brain, and I use it to
Hmm.
the best of my ability.
Sure.
Right? I don't see God as being likely at all. Like, not even that would be the more unlikely than anything I could ever think of, because all that you're talking about, you're missing the one thing that would make it convincing to me. And that
And what's
one
that?
thing is the evidence that your God exists. Not maybe he exists. I know maybe he exists.
What do you mean by
Okay.
evidence?
Something that is measurable, reproducible, utterly observable. I'm really big on observing things in my world. I'm really big on that. So
Hmm.
I'm going to say that. Some people maybe not. All right, but I'm really big on that. I mean, I don't believe things very easily anymore. I did at one time. I believe lots of stuff. Right? But I don't believe. I'm skeptical. So it's not easy to convince me of something because a man said it. All right, that's just not good enough for me. So observable is really big to me. If I could observe God, if I could detect God, that would be, it would be over. I would be believing in God. But I don't believe in things that are undetectable and invisible and do not have any presence in my life. I don't do it anymore.
So if existence itself, though, is better explained or more probable under theism, couldn't we say that existence itself, this life we have, is evidence of God?
I don't see it, and I've heard this. My own girlfriend, she's in the other room, probably watching this. All right, she
Okay.
uses the argument all the time with me because she believes in God. All right,
Okay.
and she'll say, "Well, there are things." Therefore, must be a God. I mean, I'm simplifying it, but ultimately,
Sure.
that's the bottom line. Oh, there is a universe, and I'll say yes, there is, and then it becomes, you have to, in my way, you have to go beyond that. You can just get it. There's a universe, so therefore there's a God. All right, or it makes sense that there's a God, because if there is a God, we don't know anything about this God.
Sure we
Nothing.
do.
What do we
Sure we
know?
do.
Tell
So,
me.
for example, we're aware of what his abilities are with creation, right?
No, we
If
don't. We
if
don't know that he created anything.
well, you just said if there was a God, we wouldn't be able to know anything about God. Well, this would be an example. This is something that God conceived of. Obviously, you have to conceive of it to a certain extent to make it. And so this would be an example of it. And so because I think what we're doing is we're boiling down to empiricism. I must have empirical evidence to believe something's true.
I don't say I must. I said that would go a long way for me, because this
Hmm.
believe something because you imagine it. I don't go there anymore. I'm being flat honest with you. It's not
But
something
imagine
I go there.
imagination by saying because I imagine it, that's assuming it's just an imagination to begin with. Like that's a loaded term. As opposed to approaching it from an agnostic point of view. That's why I started with the Bayesian argument from an agnostic point of view. Because if I can show theism is more probable than atheism or than naturalism, why would we take the atheism or naturalistic, the less probable route? Like, what good reasons would we have to take the less probable than the more probable belief?
Okay. When you're speaking about probability, okay,
Hmm.
what how do you think, because I really do want to know, how do you think that it is probable that something exists that we have never been able to put our hands on, detect in any way in the physical world? All right. And then we
Hmm.
have to appeal to, well, maybe there's this other world called the super world, but we have no evidence of the super world. And that becomes the likely scenario, that there is a super world.
Well, so I'm just more positing between the two hypotheses a general theism, not even like a classical or neoclassical theism, just a plain old theism, a God that's capable of creating X universe here. But I'm a Christian, so I do
Yeah.
believe that God came down in person in the form of
Mhm.
Christ, right?
Yes.
But I also believe in things like miracles, things of the sort, right? There
Right.
have been miraculous events. I mean, there's actually a scholar named Craig Keener. Have you ever heard of him before? He's a
Heard
New
him, never,
Testament
never
scholar.
like seen him, never
Okay.
really got into him.
He
I've
wrote a
heard the
book.
name.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's got at least one, maybe two or three books. And there's other scholars too who have tons of books about documented cases of miracles. So these are, and whether you believe in miracles or not, if this is something you find interesting, I would encourage you to read it, because we have lots of people, and keep in mind, for most of human existence, once you're of the age to be aware of this type of thought, most people have believed in some form of God. Now, we
Mhm.
could say that's just out of ignorance, or maybe because that's a deep intuition. Like if Christianity is true, we're made in the image of God. So we would have some reason to believe that. So like, I guess what might be a better route for you, if the resurrection, if you could take the resurrection to be true, that would change your mind, right?
Yeah, if the resurrection was proven to be true to me, of
Okay.
if I could be shown that a God exists, of course I would believe in the God, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any of these arguments getting anywhere near that. It's like you're taking attributes, well, a God would have to be this, and a God would have to be that, and a God would have to be, have it, be eternal, and a God would have to be invisible, or whatever these attributes are. All right. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that that thing exists. So I'm not going to plant my flag on that. I'm just not going to, because I choose, and it's a choice, I choose to believe things that are evidence based, not philosophically based, which I said up front. All right. I don't tend to see philosophical arguments as being persuasive when it comes things of the physical world. Like if it was the
Okay.
consensus amongst physicists that yes, there is a God, and this is, how we know it, and this is all the evidence we have for it, and this is the consensus amongst physicists, that would be impressive to me. That wouldn't automatically make it true, but it would be impressive. But all I see in the religious world is theology and philosophy, and it just is an unimpressive thing to me. And I'm not saying it has no value. I'm not trying to put these people down or
Mm-hmm.
put you down. It's a wonderful thing to study this stuff. But at the end of the day, as we say in New York, at the end of the day, it doesn't amount to anything. All right. What it comes down to, Adam, is what
Mm-hmm.
you believe. That's what it comes down to. All right. I may believe something than you believe. Now, we could argue what I believe is better than what you believe, but ultimately, if there is a God or not, the only thing we have is belief. We have no evidence of there being a God other than in people's minds. Now, I'm going to concede something, and I want to see if you pick up on this. All right. I believe in a God that is a concept. I believe in that. All right. I believe God is a concept for many, many millions of people. And some people may have the concept of God as being Allah. Some people may have the concept of God as being Jesus. Some people may have it as being Vishnu, or a force that is unnameable. All right. But
Mm-hmm.
those are concepts. They're not proven things. So I believe in God as a concept, but I don't live my life according to concepts anymore. That's what makes me more of a naturalist, right? I mean,
Well, that is a concept.
what's that?
Naturalism is a philosophy. And so I think
Well,
this is where most people get confused, is they think that naturalism is the neutral position, but that's not the neutral position. The neutral position is agnosticism. So atheism, naturalism, atheism is the claim that God does not exist. It is the positive affirmation of that. Naturalism is the positive affirmation that only the natural exists. Right. So
that's
you
that's
that is,
it's
it's one.
debatable because I've been an atheist and I
Right.
don't fit into that category. So I mean,
What category do you fit in then? You don't affirm that God doesn't exist?
no, I don't know if God exists. I do
So
not
how do you
believe.
distinguish that from an agnostic then?
Okay. And this, again, people are going to disagree on it, like everything else in this world, right? But
Mhm.
from my way of thinking, I am an atheist because I simply do not believe in any gods. That makes me an atheist. But I also consider myself agnostic in that I readily admit, and I will say it out loud all day long, I do not know and cannot know if there is a God that exists. So I am both atheist and agnostic. All right. Now
What
I
are your
understand
beliefs based off of, though? Like your atheist beliefs, right? This is the
I
common
don't have
argument.
it. I don't have any. As an
You
atheist,
don't
I
have
don't have.
any.
I
So
have
you don't,
beliefs.
you,
Yeah.
right.
Let me
So
explain
you
this.
don't believe there is no God.
I believe there is no God. Okay.
Right.
But
And
I
that
do
belief
not
is based off of
know,
knowledge, right?
but I do not know if there is a God. I separate what is in my mind subjectively. All right. So I have a subjective thought about gods, and that is I do not believe them. That's not objective, it's subjective. All right.
Well, all
I,
thoughts are
I
subjective
yes, yes,
because the thoughts are dependent on a mind. Yes.
absolutely. So I'm saying that's a subjective thought that I have. But objectively, I do not know if there is a God. And I certainly do not know if that God is the Christian God or some other God or a God that chose never to reveal himself. I don't know any of that. So that makes me agnostic in the way I view these terms. Right. Now, there are atheists that would take a position that would say, I can prove or I know without a shadow of a doubt of, I know that there is no God. But that's not me. I just don't believe in God. So,
Okay. I think this is probably, this is one very common issue I run into. Um, I would highly encourage you to look at the definition of atheism on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And this is why. There's no symmetry breaker between those two terms with that definition. So effectively, agnostic and atheist mean the same thing. You don't have beliefs that are based with no knowledge. You can't believe in something you have no knowledge of because there's no way to believe it. You don't know what it is. You have no knowledge of it. So the knowledge that you have has led you to the belief God does not exist. Would that be true?
yeah, the knowledge that I have, that
Right.
doesn't mean I have all knowledge or know all things.
No, I'm not. Nobody would say that, and that's see. My position as a theist, I affirm the proposition God exists, and I come to that belief based off of my knowledge and my experiences. Nobody can know the answer to this for certain. This is not a 2 + 2 = 4 question. We don't have a tool to objectively prove with certainty that God exists. This is part of the reason why Scripture talks about faith. We may have evidence to believe that Christianity is true, but we can't be certain. And I think God has good reason to not allow us to have certainty, but that's another discussion.
Yeah.
So that's the whole argument of divine hiddenness. But what I'm saying is so you can't like kind of sit on this like middle positions, right? You're either I believe God exists, I don't know, or I don't believe God exists. Now, you don't have to be like an ardent hard atheist. You could just be I'm leaning towards this way because of the knowledge that I have. But the reason this is why I say this, when you don't affirm a position like that, then I as an interlocutor, I can't address your position because you have no epistemic burden. And so it's pretty much just everything's on me.
Well,
And that
why
doesn't
does that
seem to
bother
be
you?
well,
I'm
that's
not
just an
understanding.
unfair way to have an argument or a
Well,
discussion.
but I can't make believe. I don't play make believe. So I'm not going to say I know that there is no God because that's not what I believe. All right. Now, I'm
You can say
sorry if
you
it's
believe it though,
I'm
but you
sorry.
believe there's no God, right?
Yes, but I don't. I separate belief, and this is how my mind works. All right. I separate
Right.
belief from knowledge. They're not the same thing to me. All right. Belief to me, I believe in lots of things and don't believe in lots of things for a variety of different reasons. Some reasons may be valid, some reasons may not. All right. But I'm not feeling it. I'm not going to say that I myself know that there is no God. So that makes me agnostic on that position of knowledge. But on the position of belief, I'm very comfortable saying I definitely do not believe in a God. But that's not the same thing as saying I know that a God doesn't exist. There are two. I mean, there are people that would say that, and I'm not arguing against them. And I also had an interesting discussion with an atheist a couple months ago, where he made a very good argument that I should just say I'm an atheist. I shouldn't even mention agnosticism. All right. And maybe so, and then I'll stick with atheist. But it's not the atheist that's going to sit here and argue that I know for sure there's no God, because I don't feel comfortable arguing that.
Well, I don't think anybody who's intellectually honest could say that one way or the other. I don't think a theist could say, I know for a fact God exists. That would be intellectually dishonest. That means there's absolutely no room for doubt. 2 + 2 = 4, right? Again, we cannot be certain. We don't have the capacity to be certain about these types of things. So we have our beliefs based off knowledge. So the whole reason I'm bringing this up, this is why I think you must compare between theism and naturalism, or theism and atheism, because I think from the argument I gave you before, if theism's more probable, then we have better reason to believe that's true. But it seems like if philosophy is not really, that's just not a thing for you, that's okay. So let's look at the resurrection.
It's a thing. I don't think it's a thing.
Philosophy of religion, I should say.
Well, I mean, again, it's obviously a thing, right? But what it isn't is a proof of a God. It's not that.
But it's using reason to show it's more likely God exists.
Well, I'm going to go with logic as the most rational way that we can approach this. So what would be your proposition logically that a God exists? What is it?
Okay, so like if we're going to use the cause argument, right?
Yeah.
I think that if the universe has a cause, right, that cause has to be able to exist outside of space and time, or not necessarily time, because there could be alternate versions of time. So we'll say outside of space, right? So it would have to be immaterial. And if that's the case, that it would also have to have the ability to cause a universe, right? God is the best explanation for such characteristics. Therefore, God exists.
Okay. Could that God be my dog?
Well, let's talk about what your dog is, right? Can you explain to me or elaborate? What do you mean when you say your dog?
Well, my dog died, but he went up into heaven, and he died physically, but he always existed.
Okay.
And he's the one who caused the universe. A lot of people think it's Allah. A lot of people think it's Jehovah, but it really was my dog.
Okay. So your dog is immaterial?
I'm going to prove he is now. He came down to earth and he took bodily form, but now he's back, in heaven on a throne. And by this logic, that there must be a cause, I'm proposing to you that my dog is the cause. What says you?
So
you don't like that, right?
Hey, as long as your dog, well, let me flesh this out, right? As long as your dog is immaterial, has the power or capacity to create a universe, would have some form of ability via consciousness to choose to start universe, to actually make that choice, and then, of course, to be able to exist immaterially. If all the same characteristics are met, no arbitrary limits, right? Then what you've done, although this is a parody, what you've done is you've defended theism, but rather than saying God, you've said my dog.
No, I was saying that, Adam, to show or to let you think like, things I
It's a
think.
parody argument.
Yeah, I'm not saying
Yes.
it like seriously. I think my dog is that,
So, but
but
what was the
but
purpose of
there
saying that
is
then?
because there is no difference with me just depositing my dog or Allah or the Vishnu or any god of any sort, all right, and just saying, well, that
Well, it can't
god.
be any sort. It would have to
Yes,
have those specific
yeah, but
characteristics.
all you do is say that. You can't prove it. It's like
Right.
I can't prove to you that my dog is immaterial and he's in heaven on a throne. I cannot prove that to you. But I could certainly make the claim that he is.
Hmm.
and,
Right.
and that's all that I see going on. It's like, well, yeah, okay,
Well,
if your God was this, and if your God was that, and if your God was
hmm
this, then yeah, I guess
hmm
things like that could happen. But your God could have been Allah. It doesn't even have to be the Christian God.
This isn't an argument for Christianity, though. This is just for theism. So this is
Yeah.
compatible with Islam. This is compatible with Judaism. This is
Or
compatible
my
not
dog.
with not with Hinduism because they have a totally different form of creation. Any form of monotheistic God, this is compatible with. And
With
but the parody
Is it
argument, though, the
compatible with
purpose,
my dog?
if that is what you believe to be a monotheistic being that could do such things, yes, absolutely.
Okay. So we agree. It's a concept. In your
So you
concept
accept
of God,
theism then?
as a concept, yes. I told you
No,
before.
it's a philosophy as opposed to naturalism.
I I don't live my life again planting my flag on naturalism. I And naturalism, for the most part that I've seen in my life, is true. Can it be false? Yeah. It has to be proven to be false for me, not just people saying something. All right.
I just
So
showed you how it's less probable.
I
That was the
I
whole Bayesian
I
argument.
guess, yeah, and I don't think it's a good argument. All right.
But
Now,
so you think it's still better to hold, like, can you refute the argument? Let's say that.
I refute the argument very simply. All right. And it's
How?
not saying the argument cannot be possible. All right. Just like my dog could possibly be God. All right. But I refute the argument because there has never been a proof of anything supernatural that we could hold on to and definitively say is true. We've never had that. So so if there is such a thing, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't even have a way of knowing that. All right. So in a concept, yes. All right. Conceptually, yeah. I mean, can I
Mhm.
believe something? Yes. All right. Can I believe that Jehovah is God? Yes, I can choose to believe that. All right. Do I know that? No. So that's it's not saying the guy is a dopey man. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that his argument is ah.
Sure. Well,
It-
so I think we're talking past each other potentially here. Ultimately, it's not. We do live our lives in a worldview. Like you keep saying, all I see is evidence of naturalism, right? But
yeah, well, I
you
see.
haven't provided me an argument to justify why you think naturalism is true over theism. Whereas I have done that. And you've just said, I don't think it's a good argument. You can say you don't think it's a good argument. You got to tell me why. You have to critique it by pinpointing what part of the argument is flawed, either with logic or some sort of mathematical error, something of the sort. So tell
Okay.
me what flaw is in the argument, because otherwise,
The
what you've
flaw,
done is
the flaw is that the idea or the premise or what this argument is built upon, however you want to word that, it's built on something that is unproven and there's no evidence for. So that argument is speculative at best. It's a speculation. It's a
This is just presupposing naturalism again.
hypothesis. You know? And,
But this is just presupposing naturalism.
okay, but
See,
I could presuppose. I got to know this because I really want to know this. If I presuppose that my dog is God, all right, and that's my presupposition, and I'm not moving from it, so what? That doesn't mean
you would
my
just
dog is
be
God.
a presup. No, that's right. I'm not a presup apologist either. I do evidential apologetics because I think presup is kind of unfair.
I agree
To
with you.
just, I don't think that that's if I'm going to win people to the kingdom, so to say, especially skeptics, by me saying you have no way to logic, you have no way to do math, I would rather weigh them out in an abductive way, so that way it's a little bit more fair of a comparison, and we can truly analyze what the likelihood between the two is. Like, okay, the cause of the universe, let's put that to the side for now. Let's look at something else, right? The life in the universe, just life at all existing. I think if we use the same type of analysis, once again, theism is going to win in the probability spectrum under Bayes' theorem, because we don't have, why would we expect life to exist in the universe under naturalism? How would we raise that probability?
How would we? Well, we
Under
observe
atheism
life.
or naturalism? No.
Yeah, I'm
Why
just
would we
saying
expect?
what I would say. We observe life. We
No.
analyze life.
I'm saying, why would we expect it to happen? If atheism is true, why would we expect life to begin?
I don't think atheism explains how life begins.
Well,
It
no, it's
certainly
just
doesn't to
think
me.
of,
I
right.
mean,
So
this is where I think
that's my point.
there's a weird thing here. All right, and at least maybe we can come to understand each other. All right.
Okay.
We don't have to agree with each other, but maybe we can understand each other, right? All right.
Sure.
I don't think that atheism explains how life came into being or how universes came into being. So
Well,
I'm going to
that's
make
not what I'm
that clear.
saying, though.
But
Yeah,
there
that's not what I'm
are,
saying, though.
well, what you're saying, how does atheism explain that? I don't think it does.
No. What I'm saying is, if we're looking at the two world hypotheses, right? Atheism, theism, naturalism, theism, whichever one you want to pick between the two. How would we raise the probability of there being life in a universe, right? A universe that has life, that's life permitting under atheism. So what explanations could you give me to raise that probability?
The explanations would be natural explanations. It would be like the study of abiogenesis, how life came into
No, that's
being.
the how. I'm
Yeah.
saying why.
Why?
Yes.
I don't have an answer to that for you. Why? I don't know why I would even need to have such an answer. I mean, I'm not, again, I'm not staying up at night wondering, well, why is there life? I don't know.
I do.
But you say you know, but you can't prove it. You have
No,
a
I'm saying
belief.
I do stay up at night thinking about these
Oh,
things.
okay. All right. And you have a belief, and I respect that belief, but I mean, I don't. I mean, why is there
But
life? I mean, a
why would we
philosophical
expect
question.
life?
It's a
Well,
philosophical question.
right. This again why I love philosophy, but I think if we can't raise the probability of why we would expect life under atheism as opposed to theism, yet again theism wins. So let's listen. This doesn't seem to be the method of approach that I think would be most entertaining for you. Let's try this. What about the resurrection, right? If that's true, like I said earlier, then you would have good reason to believe God exists, because there was a man who came down on earth who was God incarnate, died, resurrected from the dead, right? Why
I
don't
would.
you believe?
Okay. Let me make this clear because I'm pretty skeptical. Okay. All right.
Fair
So
enough.
first off, I would say that if a man rose from the dead and that can be shown and demonstrated to have happened, all right, in real life, not stories, but real life, All right, that would demonstrate to me that the supernatural is real. That it would do. All right, and I would accept that. Whether or not it was Jehovah who did that, or whether it was the devil making believe he was Jehovah, or it was Allah playing a trick on, you get what I'm saying. I wouldn't know that. I wouldn't know any of that, but I would agree that something supernatural happened.
Okay,
So that's how far I would go with that.
What about the writings of Jesus? Like let's say if we can show that the resurrection is more likely to be true than not true, would we not take into account the things he said that were written down by the gospel authors?
I've read the Bible several times at least, so I've taken into account the writings of the Bible.
But I'm saying Jesus gives a clear message about what he's here to do, the truth of God, the Father, the Holy Spirit. He tells us things about God's that so we can have knowledge. If he is God, if he is God in the predicate sense, then we have reason to believe that what he's saying is true. If he's saying he's God and then he does supernatural things to show he's God. Or you just wouldn't believe what he had to say, even if he did resurrect.
I don't think it automatically leads to the other. I mean, if a man rose from the dead, doesn't mean he said everything true. And I would believe in the supernatural, like I said.
But would you believe what he said
from the dead? But you're saying, well, because he rose from the dead, everything that was said about him is absolutely true? No. Nope.
No. What I'm saying is everything that he says that we have written down, right? We can even try to be more gracious to the skeptic, right? The majority of things in the synoptics, we won't even look at John with the highest Christology, right? Let's just look at the synoptics, which has a little bit more they're very high level Christology, I believe, too, but there are slightly more modest claims, right? We don't have the before Abraham was, I am, right? These types of things he said, the kingdom of heaven coming, repent, these types of things, just the message of Christianity. Would you believe those words of his if he resurrected from the dead? That he's the way to heaven?
I would have to determine if they were his words. Just because he rose from the dead, if he did rise from the dead, doesn't mean those were his words. They were not his words. I mean, factually, we know that. We know he didn't write anything. So,
well, that doesn't mean he didn't say it.
No, but it doesn't mean he did say it either. We
have positive evidence to believe that he did say these things in the Gospels. We don't have much evidence that would contradict that. So to say we can't say this is what he said, we have no evidence otherwise. So why would we just go off of an argument from silence as opposed to the actual data we do have?
You're talking about what I would believe. And if a man rose from the dead and I knew that happened, I would believe in the supernatural. That would not make me believe that words written about the man were true, because they do not mean, they don't add up. They could be true, they might be true, but that doesn't mean because a man rose from the dead that these words are true. These words could have been, totally fake. That is possible. Again, possible. And
it's logically possible, yeah.
Yeah, so that's where I would stand. I don't jump to conclusions anymore.
Okay, so why would you be skeptical of the Gospels then? Like, why would you be skeptical that they misquote or they're not accurate?
Well, there are parts of it that we know are not accurate.
Such as?
The end of the book of Mark comes to mind. All right, that's a known forgery accepted by Christian scholars and biblical scholars.
What does that have to do? We just took that part out because that wasn't in the oldest manuscripts like Codex Vaticanus and stuff like that.
It's in the Bible I read.
Right. Because we didn't have the manuscripts that were older. Once we discovered older ones, we saw it wasn't in it. They took it out.
So that's not in the Bible anymore?
No.
Because I was in the Bible I read when I was a Christian.
It might be in some Bibles, and then most Bibles nowadays, new Bibles, are going to have like that in italics, and then you'll see a thing at the bottom. This is not in our oldest manuscripts. Now, a lot of scholars believe there is another ending to Mark because the way it ends is kind of abrupt,
Right.
but that ending is not in our oldest manuscripts. So that's clear. It's at this point we have good reason to believe it's an addition. But is that all it took to? That's all it takes to say, oh well, these aren't reliable.
It certainly tells me that they're not supernaturally given by an all-powerful, perfect God, because they were in the book for 1,800 years or so. I mean,
Well,
again,
no, since like the
I
King
have not
James.
read a Bible in probably 10 years. Now, I
Mhm.
know I'm a pretty good Bible guy. I'm not unknowledgeable about it, but I was
Right.
unaware that they took that out of the Bible. I thought it was still there.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's been known for a long time now. A King James Bible will still have it, or like an older style Bible, but any modern Bible, I mean, for the last since we discovered Codex Vaticanus, which was a long time ago, and Codex Sinaiticus, we've known that's not what's in the oldest manuscripts at the end of Mark.
So
But
the
the
people,
point,
but you would agree then the people who had that Bible, even in my generation, that's the Bible I had. All right.
right?
We weren't getting the word of God, were we?
So, when you say the Word of God, what do you mean?
Well, when I read the Bible
Hmm.
in the 1980s,
Hmm.
okay, and I read the Bible, those passages were in the Bible. All right.
Yeah.
So those people who read it with me and may
Hmm.
have passed away, they might be gone today. They never knew that those words that were in that book were not the word of God. They did not know that. Is that correct?
Okay. Sure.
Okay, so those
But
verses, let me flesh this out a little bit. Those verses,
mhm.
they include the snake handling, poisonous snake,
Fasting and all that, yeah,
all right?
yeah.
But I want to focus on
If you
specifically
have enough faith,
handling
yeah.
poisonous snakes. All
Right,
right.
right, and your
There
faith can heal
have
you of the
been,
poison, yeah.
and there have been many people who have died doing that because they thought that was a um, a good way to show their faith to God, and they were reading something that apparently the God allowed to be in the book, all right, up until later, right? And
Okay, so
and and that to me, that idea is absurd to me. Like, why in the world would a God want that to be out there in his book
how
up
do you know God
until,
wanted that?
well, that's the whole premise, that God has a book. If you don't believe the book is from God, then how are you a Christian?
It's not from God, no. That's never been the doctrine of Christianity. It's always been
Inspired.
inspired by
Yeah.
God,
Well,
yes.
why would he
Right.
have a book inspired by him that would lead to the death of people? Like, why?
Anything that happens in humanity, so long as there are beings capable of evil, is going to lead to, like, anything can be used to lead to the death of people. Christianity has also been used to lead to the abolition of slavery, the invention of hospitals, Catholic universities. Like, a lot of good has come from Christianity as
Good,
well. But the
good and
point
bad.
is that the doctrine of divine inspiration is not God dictating what's to be written.
Okay,
It's that
what
God,
did he give us then? A book that had
the Holy
scribal errors.
Spirit,
He gave
well,
us a
that
book
God, that
that
those aren't the
told
original
people they could
manuscripts.
handle poisonous snakes. He gave us that.
God didn't give us that.
Well, who
Man
did?
did. Man.
Yeah, but it was,
His Yes.
if you were born just 100 years ago, you would have
Uh-huh.
seen in that book that
Uh-huh.
you could handle poisonous snakes, and you might have been a person that went out and did that and died from that. All right.
Perhaps.
And I'm not saying you would have, but you could have. And if
Mhm.
you did, you're eliminating all responsibility of the God that allowed that, knowing that
It
people were looking at that as important for them. And he
it's
allowed
not
that
God's
book.
duty, though. That's not
What,
God's
what
duty to stop
exactly?
all evil.
Well, what
If he
is
did
it
that,
God's
everyone would be
work?
gone.
Adam, what
Well,
is it
so
God
if
does? Can
Christianity
I
is
ask you that?
true, yeah, absolutely.
What does
He
he do?
came down
What does he
incarnate
do?
and then died for our sins,
What
and
does he
now has
do
given us
today?
the path to heaven.
Today.
So, for example, if somebody, let's say, did have very strong faith and they thought that's truly what the word of God said, and they went and handled a poisonous snake and was bitten and then died. If
Mhm.
they spend the rest of their life in eternity, is that really that horrible in paradise? Right? This doesn't mean it's a good thing that that happened, but God can
No.
rectify the
So
mistakes of
God,
man.
God was like, "Oh, it's okay because now I'm going to take you to heaven." And you read a book that I allowed to go out with a forgery, and I decided not to do anything about that because man is bad. So I allowed my book to go out by bad men who wrote something that led to the death of others. But now that you died from that, I'm going to allow you to have peace. Okay.
Well,
All
I'm
right.
saying that would be the way God could rectify it. So it's not that, see, I think you have this misconception that God is responsible for evil, but that's not God's responsibility. God doesn't commit the evil, we do.
Well, I'm not saying that he's responsible for anything. I don't believe in him. Okay. But
So
but
why are
if
you saying that? Why did he allow the book
because
that
if
Mark to
he
have this
was
false
real,
ending?
because I'm supposing, because I read the book, all right,
Hmm.
if he was real and having
Hmm.
read the book, he allowed things to go on that I would not personally allow to go on if I was a god. And I know I'm not a god, but
But do
I
you
would
think
not
you
allow.
know better? Are you omnipotent?
No, none.
Are you omniscient?
I'm just a dumb old man from New York.
What I'm
I'm not.
saying is that you're using your finite mind, right? We have finite, limited minds to say, well, this would be the better thing. And we're saying we know better than the omnipotent, omniscient being.
I, I have no obligation to that being. You do. You have
But I'm
obligation.
saying think of the mindset that you have to say God is God. I would have done this if I were God. Well, is it possible that the omniscient being, the one that knows all possible things, might know better?
He has and did in the scriptures say some crazy stuff, and maybe he knew some. He says, "Okay, it's good to kill the children. It's good to kill the babies, and I know more than you." And maybe, but I don't even believe he's real. So for me, that doesn't play a factor. All I do is I determine in my
But
own small, dumb New York mind
mhm.
what what I would do, and that's all I'm responsible for. All right, and
I, yeah.
I'm allowed to have my opinion, and I'm allowed to
Well,
think.
you are absolutely. But what I'm saying is, I don't think that that's a good reason to doubt God's existence because you would have done otherwise.
I don't doubt my exist. I don't personally doubt God's existence because he did a lot of dumb things in the Bible. That's not why I do it.
Well,
But
what
but
dumb
I do
things did he do in
recognize
the
he did a
Bible?
lot of dumb things in the Bible.
But what dumb things did he do? Did God do?
Okay. Now, of course, dumb and not dumb is a subjective thing. Okay.
Hmm.
Because it is something we're either going to conclude as dumb or not dumb based on our subjective thought patterns. All right.
Okay.
But in my thinking, in my thought patterns, um, saying that it's okay uh, to take foreigners and make them your slaves was a
Hmm.
dumb thing. Now, that's me. Right? Am I saying absolutely, objectively, factually, with every possibility that was dumb? No, it's my subjective belief that that is a dumb thing to do.
Okay. So, you're talking about Leviticus, what is it, 25:44 through 46, right?
Yes.
Okay. Um, although we today in the modern world see slavery as immoral, and ironically, this was started from Christian abolitionists back in the 19th century. You won't see abolitionist movements in the East. You're only going to see that in the West. And any Eastern movements that have started have followed the West because it's been the way of the culture since. But at that time, it's possible, right? I've wrestled with this verse before. Why did God say, now do keep in mind, this was not forced. Like these were people that sold themselves into slavery. Who? Oh, yes. In that specific verse, it is.
Someone lied.
You may purchase them. I can assure you, I've had this discussion multiple times. This specific verse, this isn't talking about when Moses goes and fights the Canaanites or anything of the sort. You may purchase the foreigners among you and have them be your slaves, your ebed, which is the Hebrew word, right? Mm-hmm. Is it possible that those people's living conditions were so bad they thought it best to sell themselves to slavery rather than to live out in either the wasteland or to live out unprotected, unmastered?
It's not in the text. I mean, you could
but
add.
We can still text. Use.
You could add anything you want to it, but it's not there. It's not what it says.
So it seems most of your critique is going to come from a fundamentalist view of Christianity, and I understand that.
Most of my thoughts on the Bible, because I read it as a fundamentalist. Okay, mm-hmm. So yes, I would say I have a fundamentalist interpretation of the Bible. Yeah.
Okay. Because if you look at Old Testament scholars, you'll get a totally different view on what this literature meant 3,000 years ago. Like I think that one problem a lot of people do is they read this the Old Testament, particularly, even in the New Testament, you're reading a 3,000-year-old text in a modern lens. And I think the fundamentalist church does a bad job at this, and they misinterpret things horribly. But before we get down that rabbit trail, I want to take it back to the Gospels because we don't have too much time here. So the Gospels, right? If we believe that the Gospels are reliable, then we have good reason to believe that what they say about the death and resurrection of Christ, the deity of Christ, these sorts of things are true. If the Gospels were reliable, would that be enough to bring you to believe in Christianity?
If you mean by reliable in that when it says a man rose from the dead, when it says, supernatural things that can never be proven and just taken on faith, if all of those things happened as the Bible says, mm-hmm. I don't believe that happened like that. That's why I'm not a believer.
So what could I do? So you have to see this happen in front of you in order for you to believe it.
No, there's no. It's not. I accept things I do not see. Okay. But I do critically analyze things. Right. Even things I don't see. Right. That someone says to me, the house up the road, a ghost came in there the other day and did some sort of thing, and that person had a heart attack because they saw the ghost, and I also saw the ghost, and it's 2 houses mm-hmm. down. I'm not just accepting that at face value. I want to do a more thorough research for myself for me to believe that. And if I find out that there's nothing to the story other than a story, then I'm out. I'm not believing that.
So what would we need to show you for the example for what's written in the Gospels for that to be true? What additional evidence do you need?
Other than the Bible? Like I'm saying, other than what I've read already?
Right.
I've read the Bible several times. Right? I read it as a Christian. Mm-hmm. So at one time, I believed these things. After critically analyzing them, I no longer believe it So what would I need other than the Bible would be other evidence, other things.
Okay, so but you don't. I guess I don't understand why you don't believe in the Bible, specifically the Gospels. And when we say the Bible, it's a collection of, at least in the Protestant Bible, 66 books.
Mhm.
So the Gospels are 4 different authors. They're all considered Greco-Roman biographies. This has been the consensus of scholarship since Richard Burridge wrote his paper in like 2007. So we have 4 eyewitness accounts of what happened. 2 of them are written by actual eyewitnesses, 2 of them are not. So now you can doubt the authorship, you can doubt the dating, right? But is that part of your
You see me
skepticism?
saying, really?
Okay,
I mean,
so
we don't have eyewitness accounts. I
well,
mean,
why don't you think that?
why would, all right, an eyewitness in court, if you go to court, you say,
Mhm,
I got 100 eyewitnesses.
mhm,
And the judge says, all right, we'll bring them in and we can examine them. We can direct examine them and cross examine them. All right.
mhm.
And you say, well, I don't really know who they are. And I don't know where they are. And I don't even know their names. That's not an eyewitness. That's a story. And
Well, that's not what we have with the
it's
Gospels.
just like the story of me going a couple doors down and the guy telling me that the ghost came in and he
Mhm.
saw it. It's the same thing, but that guy I can actually talk to, but I can't talk to any of these eyewitness accounts. And really,
So that means you can't
who is
believe any
I gotta
historical
know who
account
is
then?
it you think in the Bible was an eyewitness? Who is it?
Well, Luke straight up says, "I got these stories from eyewitnesses" in the beginning of his gospel, right? Um, Mark, we can see from the early church fathers like Justin Martyr, who says that Mark is the account of Peter. He specifically mentions the account of Peter, where they talk about the sons of thunder. The only gospel that the sons of thunder are mentioned in is Mark. Matthew, we can see traces. He's the only gospel author that mentions all these stories about money, kind of like a tax collector, maybe somebody who was involved with money. But the church tradition has always been that John and Matthew are eyewitnesses; they're the apostles, and then Mark was the follower of Peter, who wrote the account of Peter, and then Luke gathered multiple different eyewitnesses, and then also took a lot from Mark as a fellow synoptic. I guess I don't see why we wouldn't believe. Like, what evidence is there to contradict? And I've read lots of the literature from the critical scholarship against the gospel authors, and I just don't see where they're coming from. It seems like a large argument from silence. Like, so would you take the view that they're anonymous authors?
I don't know who wrote them. All right. I know there's tradition says different, you know, certain people wrote them. I
Hmm.
don't know that. I mean, it's possible. All right. The bottom line is what you described is hearsay. It literally is hearsay. It's going to court and saying, Judge, I do know that some people told me that they seen something. And a judge says, well, okay, can you bring them here? Well, no. Who are they? I don't know. I don't know their names. But
But
I'm swearing to
that's
you,
not
they told
analogous.
me. Yes, it is. Yes, it
No,
is.
it's not, because they
What
name people specifically in the Gospels who
what is
experience certain
hearsay?
things.
What does hearsay mean?
It's just something that you hear from someone else.
That's what you have.
No, we have documented accounts, firsthand eyewitness accounts that are written. Like, these people are dead, so obviously we can't go back and talk to them. So, but in the instance of having written accounts of what happened in ancient history, that's the best we have. By your methodology, we can't believe anything we have written from Plato, Aristotle, Julius Caesar, any ancient historians.
I'm not judging all those. And if I was getting all into Julius Caesar and whoever else is an ancient person, I would have the same level of skepticism.
But you
I'm
can't
not
believe
an
any of
expert
ancient
on it.
history then. You can't believe any of it. Anything you read, you can't, because we have more data to support the gospel, Jesus, and the events that happened in the gospels than we do in almost any historical figure. Perhaps one or two, like Julius Caesar, maybe the one person who has a little bit more writings, but he's a Caesar as opposed to a peasant named Jesus of Nazareth.
Without comparing the evidence for Caesar and the evidence for Alexander the Great or the evidence for anyone ancient, without doing that, because I don't know the evidence for those things, all right? But I do know the evidence that's given for Jesus. I know that, all right, because I've read it and I've looked at it, all right? And it is hearsay. The eyewitnesses are not eyewitnesses. What we have.
How do you know they're not eyewitnesses?
because when you say eyewitness, it means that the person who saw this happen can be questioned and is known who they are. All right. It is not hearsay. It's not speculation.
That's not what eyewitness means.
It's not.
Eyewitness just means what it literally counts. Somebody who witnessed an event physically.
Okay.
They are an eyewitness.
Okay. Are there eyewitnesses that the Sai Baba, because I study other religions, Adam, are there eyewitnesses alive today who've seen the Sai Baba do miraculous things?
Right. And there are also eyewitnesses that say that he's a liar.
Okay, but they can be interviewed, can't they?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what is the big deal that there was eyewitnesses if it doesn't matter? You're not going to believe the Sai Baba did miracles, are you?
I would investigate it. Yeah, I have.
All right. So when someone says they saw the Sai Baba do miracles, you accept their testimony?
I get curious and I investigate. Absolutely.
So you would accept that the Sai Baba did miracles if someone told you that? I would not.
I would be skeptical because miracle by definition is a very improbable event, something that's very unlikely to happen. So I'm going to be skeptical, but I believe miracles are possible, so I would certainly investigate.
There are people who said they saw the Sai Baba rise from the dead.
Right.
I don't believe them.
I don't believe them either because there were other people that said they're liars and he's a liar. We didn't see him rise from the dead. We were there.
So eyewitness, just because someone says they're an eyewitness, that alone doesn't prove a damn thing, does it?
But that's the best testimony. That's the best evidence you get from ancient history is eyewitness testimony.
Okay. In the Mormon religion, people swear and wrote testimony.
And they recanted.
All right. Yep. And there's every single religion has songs and dances, and some people say this and some people say that. The only point I'm trying to make, it's very limited. I'm not saying I believe.
Yeah, but these comparisons are not analogous.
There are people who swore and wrote in testimony and signed the documents that they saw the tablets. And yet you don't believe them, do you?
No, but I have very good reason not to believe them. Number one, Joseph Smith is a self-certified prophet. There is no attestation to his prophecy that's supposedly in Genesis 50:33, a verse that doesn't exist in any Old Testament manuscript that we have. So this means that only Joseph Smith knows of this prophecy. The prophet is the only person who can verify the prophecy, right? In Christianity, Jesus has multiple prophecies in the Old Testament that pre-exist his human coming. So even if you want to say that these prophecies weren't fulfilled, there are at least prophecies that can be pointed to, right? That we can say this is a messianic prophecy that Jesus fulfilled, where they at least exist. They pre-exist Jesus. The argument on whether they actually describe what happened is a different ballgame. But for Joseph Smith, same with Muhammad, there's no evidence of this earlier prophecy. With Muhammad, the Injil, that this gospel that Jesus supposedly wrote, that predicted, that prophesied Muhammad. We have no evidence of this, right? So
you critically analyze these other religions, right?
Just like Christianity, yeah.
Oh, you critically analyze Christianity.
Yes, I just gave you the comparison between all three.
And yet you could say we have eyewitnesses that seen Jesus risen.
Yes.
How did you analyze that?
Well, I have to look into the historical criterion, right? There's a criterion of credibility of some sort, historical criterion to determine whether documentation from ancient history is reliable. And the New Testament, the Gospels meet many of them. The criterion of embarrassment, the criterion of dissimilarity. There's many different historical criterion that they meet to show that they're telling an authentic truth. And the fact that there are actually inconsistencies between them is going to add to the likelihood of them being true, because true testimony is never 100% accurate amongst eyewitnesses, right?
So when
If
there's contradictions, it's a good thing.
it doesn't mean that they're both true. It just means that one of them is wrong, but it means that flawed human beings gave this testimony rather than people after the fact editing it and, oh, we got to fix that to make sure they all match each other. That would seem bogus, because that there are no embellishments. There are no, like, there's embarrassing stories in the Gospels that they left in there.
So what?
That is a measure of truth, not a measure of folklore or fairy tale or legend. This is more likely to be true. But that's what I'm saying is
that criteria that you just used,
that's one.
Is really, really weak.
The criterion of embarrassment is one of multiple.
Very weak.
Why is it weak?
You are so much speculating, all right, and there's nowhere that would hold up in any sort of real critical way of thinking that that's a proof.
Historians use this as a legitimate criterion.
That criterion for me, sorry, that ain't doing it for me.
Yeah, but it seems weird. Earlier you said if physicists were to have a consensus that that God exists, then you would take that seriously. Well, historians take this criterion seriously. So why don't you? Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Christian apologists take that serious.
All historians take that seriously.
I beg to differ.
That adds to, because from a logical sense, if you leave embarrassing stories inside of literature of some sort, that would lead you to believe it hasn't been heightened. It hasn't been edited to make the person look better, right? If Peter, why would we write? And then that's another thing too. Why are none of the Gospels named after Peter? Like, that would seem to be the first person you want to name, the rock of the church. Why wouldn't we title any of them Peter? No, we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, two people that weren't even apostles. And then we have the beloved apostle, and then probably the most hated in the beginning, the tax collector, Matthew. So we have a lot of good historical criterion to measure these Gospels against, to think that they're true. What they're telling is authentic. But
well,
listen, I don't have.
Let me say one thing.
Okay.
This historical evidence that you're talking about, all right, mm-hmm. Could it be, and I'm just asking this, all right, could it be that maybe you want to believe that stuff? Is that possible?
Sure. I could be totally psychologically deluded and have.
Okay. Or you don't have to be deluded. It could just be simple bias that you've invested in something and you prefer for it to be true than not true. And mm-hmm. I'm just saying that's just common to humanity. I could do the same thing. All right? Sure. But I'm just asking, man to man, is it possible that you really kind of want this to be true?
It's logically possible. I mean, I would prefer Christianity be true than atheism. Yes. Because then there's an afterlife to look forward to.
Islam, right? You prefer Christianity over Islam, right?
Yes.
Okay. I prefer making up my own mind. I don't have a preference if it was Islam, if it was Judaism, if it was Christianity, atheism, agnosticism, whatever ism you put on it. I have no preference. I just want to know truth. That's it.
So do I.
Yeah, but you said you have a preference. I have no preference.
So I prefer truth. You didn't ask me about truth. You asked me about a dichotomy, and I gave you the
answer of the dichotomy. Preference. If you would prefer or had a reason to think, gee, I would like this to be true.
Yes.
All right. I don't even approach it like that. I don't care what's true. I just want to know as much truth as I can.
I do care what's true.
I care what's true. I don't have a bias like, oh, well, I'm against Christianity, I'm against Islam. No, if someone could prove to me or show and demonstrate that Islam is true, then I could be Islamic. But
Yeah.
I don't know if you could. And the reason I say that,
I mean, I would be a Muslim before I'd be an atheist.
okay, but would you be able to handle at this point in your life, okay,
If
with
Islam
wife,
was true,
no,
yes.
listen, with wife, with children,
Hmm.
having raised children a certain way, because
Hmm.
I was a father and I'm a grandfather, all right,
Hmm.
and I raised children a certain way, right,
Hmm.
and I'm asking you, if you found out, if you literally found out that the story of the resurrection was false, would you just bow out, tell your children it's all fake, and walk away?
Yes.
Okay, because I would. That's
I would
all. I
not want to
wanted
be
to see.
telling my children a lie.
Yeah, I don't either. But I did tell my children a lie.
Well, I don't think you did, but if I was convinced that Christianity was false, if it were falsified, right? If they found the body of Jesus, if they found a bunch of contradictory gospels that showed something otherwise, um, I would not want to be telling my kids something false. I'd want them to know what's true, no matter how emotionally difficult it may be for me in the beginning. That's not my concern. Like when you ask me, do I want Christianity to be true? I want it to be true because I think it's beautiful, but that doesn't make the truth legitimate or not. It
Yeah,
doesn't have any effect on the truth. What
yeah,
matters is the actual question: is it true? And I
yes,
think, and remember, I've only given you 2 historical criterion. There are more than 5 that the gospel meets that are standard amongst all ancient history. So if it meets historical criterion to be accepted, really, like the reason that the skeptics like Bart Ehrman, for example, I'm sure you know who he is, he rejects the miraculous claims in the gospel from
hmm,
an a priori anti-miracle stance.
hmm,
That is fallacious reasoning. That's circular reasoning. Why aren't miracles true? Because they're not true. That is circular reasoning. That's
well,
not a good way
is
to
it
do philosophy.
circular for me to say I reject claims that are not um, evidentiary, so that if someone gives me a miraculous claim, is it okay for me to ask for the evidence of that claim for me to analyze it, or is that not fair for me to do?
Sure, you
Yeah,
can ask for evidence.
well,
Yeah,
that's what I ask Christians all the time, and all I get is philosophy and theology, and the Bible says this, and
that's evidence. Like you can reject it, but on what grounds are you rejecting it?
again, it's when we talk about evidence, you and I just talk about different things. All right. So
Evidence
yes,
is information or data that raises the probability of something being true. All of that, what you just named, philosophical arguments. We just went through a whole probability thing earlier. I showed you how
yeah.
theism is more probable to be true.
Does the Quran have evidence?
It has some, but there are pretty big flaws.
Okay, but it has evidence, right?
It's somewhat historically accurate. Yeah.
Yeah, it has it. There's a book.
Hmm.
It's historical. The book.
Hmm.
All right. It has some
Some of it.
historical. It has some historical places. All right.
Yeah,
So
some are wrong too.
I, some of the Bible's
Like
wrong.
like what?
But
But
the
like
point
what?
is that,
Like what
like,
though? Like they're not comparable, and I think this is the problem. People weigh out religions and they think, well, this is no different. You're more critical of Islam than you are of Christianity. No, the evidence is far greater for Christianity than it is for Islam. For example, I'll give you a quick defeater, like I already did earlier about the self-certifying prophecy for Islam. Um, we don't even have evidence that like Medina and Mecca, as named in the Quran, was where they say it was in 700 some BC. The other thing too, there are scientific like errors in the Quran, but the Quran is supposed to be actually dictated by God, as opposed to the Bible, which is just inspired but still written by flawed men. The Quran is actually dictated by God, and then the Quran also, it says things like sperm comes from the back. We know that that's not true. We can scientifically prove that's objectively false. It's a strange thing for God to get wrong. And then another last very quick piece. It denies the crucifixion of Jesus, which is a very commonly accepted historical fact amongst most historians. Not the resurrection, the crucifixion. Right? This is not really contested. The majority of historians agree that there was a man named Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified by Pontius Pilate. We have extra biblical testimony that, or authors that talk about this: Josephus, Tacitus, Pliny the Younger. We have many people that talk about at least the crucifixion. But this book that was written 600 years later says that didn't happen. Why would we trust that as opposed to the sources that are right around the event itself?
Well, the reason people may trust that, probably the number one reason, is that that's how they were brought up and that's how they were indoctrinated, because that plays a role in what we believe, right? And
sure,
that's just the way the human mind works. You bring up a child and you tell them over and over that something is the way it is, they're going to believe you, right? That's children. That's indoctrination of people, right? So most of the people who are Islamic were indoctrinated into this, usually when they were very young. And it's likewise in Christianity. Most of the people who are Christians were indoctrinated into it when they were young, right? So there's not much of a difference. You prefer one book over another, but you say
I just gave you evidential reasons why I do, and you're not accounting for them.
I could pick apart the Bible all night long. I don't want to do that. All right. What I'm saying,
but I can give you specific examples that are easily verifiably false. Can you do that with the Bible? Specifically, the New
prophecy
Testament.
of Tyre.
That was wrong?
Yeah, verifiably wrong according to scholarship.
Okay, so Tyre wasn't destroyed.
No, the story in the Bible is verifiably not true according to scholarship.
What scholars?
Look it up. Really, I don't have a bunch of notes sitting here.
Okay.
And I'm talking off the top of my head, but look it up for yourself.
Oh, my thing froze. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. Oh, but don't look it up by what Christian apologists have to say. All right.
No, I would look up scholarship.
The thing with resurrection, the majority, the consensus on the resurrection is that it is not historical.
Yeah, I didn't say the resurrection.
Say, oh, no.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I said the crucifixion.
You said the crucifixion. And I agree with you on that.
Yes.
But I don't agree with you that the resurrection is considered historical fact at all.
No, yeah, that's it's like a silly question, like to say that only Christian scholars believe in the resurrection. Well, if you believe in the resurrection, you are by definition a Christian. So
and you're going to have a Christian bias.
Well, not necessarily, like, because remember, this is a two-edged sword. If you say that, well, the atheists, the critics, would be an anti-Christian bias. So, like, the sword cuts both ways. So that doesn't really help. It's more about the actual arguments and evidence that they're presenting to justify their position. And does reasoning lead us to believe such positions? Not who has what bias. Like the bias game is just poisoning the well.
Okay, but you do agree. Tell me if I'm mistaken. You do agree that consensus from historians is not that Jesus rose from the dead.
I don't know about consensus, but it's at least 50-50.
It's more. There's a lot more that believe he did not rise from the dead. Okay, all right, but you could look.
You're talking about like antiquity, historians of antiquity, specifically.
No, historians, just people who study history.
I don't know of any consensus of every kind of historian.
You said, and I know you recognize this because you said it, that the historians believe that the crucifixion happened.
Of antiquity, yes.
And we agree with that. Yes. Now look up how many historians say that the resurrection happened. That's what I want you to do.
Well, I
Not
would say it's at
one
best
half, but
50-50 at best. Probably less historians of antiquity would agree with the resurrection per se, because you have people like Dale Allison, who is a Christian, and he believes in the resurrection, but he almost acts like the historical evidence isn't there. I rely on my faith, right? Like Dan McClellan is a Mormon, and he tears apart the Bible constantly. That's like which is weird because you have to affirm the Bible to be a Mormon. At least it's Joseph Smith version of the Bible. So he says no, it needs to be on faith alone, not historical evidence. Okay, which he kind of has to say when you're, in Mormonism, like we don't have any evidence of the Nehemites or Lamanites. There's like no archaeological evidence that those people even existed. But
I want to say one last thing, and then
Yeah.
you could finish up. Right?
Sure.
My only point, if there's any point I might make to you, is that when you go and see your children, you don't have to go to historians. You don't have to do any of that. You know they're real. All right. There's no argument needed. All right. And when you talk about Jesus, who people say they have a personal relationship with, they do have to go to arguments and philosophy and theology and biblical
not everyone.
criticism. All right.
Some people just believe based off of personal experiences. But either way, this has nothing to do with the truth of theism. We're just comparing apples and oranges.
No, I'm saying how I determine more based on what I can see, touch, feel, detect,
empiricism.
All right. And know to be real rather than these theologies, these old books, these philosophies. All right. I don't really put much emphasis on that. And that might just be the difference between you and me.